The upcoming meeting between Putin and Trump in Alaska is the #1 topic for Russian propaganda. The Kremlin's main goal is to portray Ukraine and Europe as obstacles to reaching a peace agreement, and to present the negotiations as a diplomatic victory for Russia. And here, of course, the entire arsenal of Russian propaganda is being used. Lies, manipulation, and distortion of facts. What should we pay special attention to, and what is Putin really afraid of? Let's break it down. The meeting in Alaska does not mean the end of international isolation for Putin. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio confirmed, Trump's talks with the Kremlin dictator are purely introductory. There is no talk of any concessions to Moscow. But according to Rubio, a face-to-face meeting offers far more opportunities than phone talks. That's why the head of the White House decided to hold it. For President Trump, the meeting is not a concession. If you look at the news, you see people losing their minds. Oh, what a victory for Putin. He got the meeting. He himself doesn't see it that way. A meeting is what you do to clarify positions and make a decision. I want to have all the facts. I want to look this person in the eye. And that's exactly what the president wants to do. Marco Rubio, U.S. Secretary of State, in an interview with the podcast Sit and Friends in the Morning. But Russian propagandists are already working hard to create the illusion of a Kremlin victory. Moscow needs to distract attention from the real expectations and risks of the summit and present any failure as a deliberate attack on Russia. Sowing discord among Ukraine's partners and ending military support for Kyiv are the Kremlin's main goals. And they'll be working these talking points to the fullest during the summit.
The Russians are trying to make it look like only they and Trump are deciding the fate of Europe and the war in Ukraine. They're trying to act as if no other viewpoints exist. However, they're in for disappointment and unmet expectations. Trump doesn't see Russia as an equal, and the U.S. goal is to talk about the Arctic and Russia as a raw materials appendage. When it comes to Europe and Ukraine, the U.S. talks with Europe and Ukraine. The reality that awaits Putin is, once again, not going to please him. Andrei Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation at the National Security and Defense Council, on Telegram.
Putin is going to Alaska primarily out of fear, according to Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. Loud statements about diplomatic victory and the symbolism of the meeting place. All of this is just a smokescreen. The resumption of American arms supplies to Ukraine and secondary sanctions against Moscow's key partners are a serious blow to Putin's war machine. And only from this position can you negotiate with the Russian dictator. Graham is convinced.
I can't imagine anyone else on the planet who could bring Putin to the negotiating table except Trump. But the reason Putin is going to Alaska is that President Trump announced the sale of weapons to Europe to help Ukraine, and this alarmed Putin. The U.S. president also imposed higher tariffs on India for buying Russian oil. India is the second largest buyer of Russian oil, which supports Russia's war machine. That's why Putin is going to Alaska.
Moscow, by agreeing to peace talks, is trying to avoid the sanctions that U.S. President Donald Trump has promised to impose. This is the opinion held by most European politicians. Therefore, the European Union will continue working on new restrictive measures against the Russian Federation and will keep supporting the Ukrainian army.
Moscow hopes that its offer of dialogue will help avoid U.S. sanctions. However, the history of broken promises and agreements by Russia has created deep mistrust on both sides of the Atlantic. U.S. pressure on Moscow could change the course of this war. Moscow will not stop until it feels it is unable to continue. Kaja Kallas, High Representative of the EU for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy.
There are no signs that Russia is preparing to end the war, and only the joint efforts of Ukraine, the United States, and Europe can force Putin to make peace. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is convinced. Over the past few days, he has held more than 30 conversations and consultations with partners. A visit to Berlin, a meeting with Chancellor Friedrich Merz, a video conference with European leaders and the President of the United States, and a meeting of the Coalition of the Willing. All of these are important steps on the path to a stable and lasting peace.
A conversation between the President of the United States and Putin can certainly be important for their bilateral track. but they cannot make any decisions about Ukraine without us. And I truly believe and hope that the President of the United States understands and realizes this. Of course, we will have a meeting at the leaders' level, a trilateral one. I don't know the date. If we want to end the war, that's how it will be. I think we cannot give up all our freedom and independence, and that's the most important thing we cannot surrender in this war. Because no matter how hard it is for us, this is a war for Ukraine's independence.
European leaders insist the path to peace in Ukraine cannot be determined without Kyiv, and Europe's security must not be put at risk. All peace negotiations must take place only under conditions of a ceasefire. Russia's aggressive war against Ukraine has far-reaching consequences for both European and international security. In Europe, there is a strong hope that President Trump will approach talks with Putin from this standpoint, and that he will also provide real security guarantees for Ukraine.
We agreed that immediately after meeting with Putin, the US president will inform Volodymyr Zelensky and then also the European leaders. There is hope for peace in Ukraine. On the European side, we are united. From Germany's side, I am doing everything I can to seize any diplomatic opportunity to end this terrible war.
An important point, which was made very clear by President Trump, is that territorial issues related to Ukraine can and will be decided only by the Ukrainian president. We support this position, and it was expressed very clearly by President Trump, and that is why it sets the tone for our future meetings. The issue of the occupied territories will be a key element in peace negotiations. It is inseparable from the guarantees of peace provided to the rest of Ukraine and Europe, and therefore it cannot be discussed without the Ukrainian president at the negotiating table. At present, no serious territorial exchange plan is being discussed.
Since returning to the White House, President Trump has spoken with Putin by phone 4 times. He described these conversations as good and constructive. But every time, in response to any peace initiative, the Kremlin dictator answered with massive shelling of Ukrainian cities. But Putin understands the language of force much better. Many in Trump's inner circle say that the US president is able to detect even the slightest changes in his interlocutor's behavior that indicate they are lying. He himself once said the following: "Some people are just born to lie. I know it and I can feel it." But his conversation partner in Alaska is a special case. The whole world has long known and sensed how Putin lies.